If you have ADHD and autism, then you're more likely to experience anxiety and depression than just having one of those. If you're going to a social event and already before you go, you're nervous about small talk, you're nervous about reading the room or coming across as socially awkward, then you're already anxious before you go. And in that spiral, if the shame kicks off, the RSD kicks in, that stuff can really be upsetting and actually very dangerous as well.
Dr. Mark Rackley is an ADHD specialist psychologist
with 2 decades of experience helping people with their mental health.
Due to popular demand, he's back for a 3rd time.
This time to deep dive into the psychology of AuDHD.
The mix between autism and ADHD, for the person who has both of those going on, they're being pulled in multiple different directions, but then trying to maintain stability. If they hear something and they want to deep dive into that, then it's like, well, I can't do that. So they're holding back. They're not being their authentic selves. That comes at a very high price in terms of the anxiety that causes.
How hard is it, if you have that internal tug of war, to find your true self?
It's very tough, because in order to find your true self, you have to be...
Loyal listeners and viewers, I can't thank you enough for tuning in to ADHD Chatter, where we ask world-leading ADHD experts the hard questions to give you access to the most cutting-edge information on the topic. If you've ever felt broken or different, I hope this helps in your search for information, answers, and community. And do you know what would really help me in return? By clicking the follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening. It might not seem like much, but at ADHD Chatter, it means a huge deal. And with this, I can book more incredible guests and keep the self-discovery fire alive for all of us, including myself. Just one click of a button goes a lot further than you think. We'll promise to listen to your feedback and book the guests you want on topics that matter to you. And remember, you're not broken, just different, and you have always been enough. Dr. Mark, welcome back to the ADHD Chatter studio.
Thank you so much for having me back, guys. And I feel like I'm part of the furniture now. Imprinted in the chair.
This is your 3rd solo episode, right?
It is, yeah. 3rd solo, 4th time. Yeah, so
back by popular demand. And in fact, I think...
Was that my mother?
On behalf of everyone who's ever described themselves as an introverted extrovert, I'm excited about this episode.
Yes,
to dive into the complexities of AuDHD, the dual diagnosis. But to start with, what's your mission in terms of ADHD, autism?
So professionally, I've been working with people with autism and ADHD for over 20 years. My voice to be part of that community is really important, so that I can advocate for that community, but also for me professionally, because I hear all those stories, that I feel a responsibility to be able to advocate. And this is a great platform to do that, obviously. And there's a great quote by Kim Stagliano. I don't know if you know her. So she's a mother of 3 autistic girls in America. She's a huge spokesperson for especially autism. And she said that autism is not a tragedy. Ignorance is a tragedy. That, for me, it kind of says it all. It's not the autism the person has that's the tragedy here. It's ignorance around it, and ignorance around kind of what's going on for this person. So in a long rounded way, I want to remove the ignorance. Because if you're ignorant about something, then you don't know better. I want people to know better, because when you know better, you can do better.
So you've very much got skin in the game.
Yeah.
I think ignorance has been such a issue with the community, particularly even many people that have an autism diagnosis or an ADHD diagnosis, suddenly realizing that they could potentially also have another diagnosis to get. I suppose sitting on the outside and looking in, maybe to sort of mute some of that ignorance, a very basic question: what would be some of the general common traits of ADHD, and therefore also what would be some of the general common traits of autism?
Yeah. And with these things, ADHD is a bit more, I suppose, I don't use the word predictable, but in terms of what you're looking for, so and how that figures out in the patient's life. So you'd have the I don't even like using this word, but anyway, I don't until we change it. The executive dysfunction. So when it comes to even it just makes no sense, that word, is that executive dysfunction. But anyway, the executive functioning, i.e. dysfunction. So things around like planning and being able to manage parts of your life to do with timekeeping. And just the kind of day-to-day structure can be a challenge because the brain gets distracted and finds it hard to stay on task. For me, I suppose one of the big ones is the emotional dysregulation. So the RSD, the sensitivity, the sense of being overwhelmed or finding the emotions hard to regulate. Also, the common ones, of course, as well, the impulsivity, the chasing dopamine. The other big one with ADHD, of course, is the hyperactivity. So just finding it very difficult to kind of manage that energy that's in the body all the time. And actually with autism, there's two kind of main ones with autism, really. It's more to do with the kind of the social interaction and the social challenges that person can have. And then the other big one with autism is the rigidity of thought or rigidity of behavior. So they're kind of the main ones with autism, actually, and then the main ones with ADHD. But of course, the thing with autism, again, it's on the spectrum. So because it's on the spectrum, then it's not a one size fits all in terms of presentation. It's very much about kind of where that person sits on the spectrum and how their autism affects their life. Yeah.
And if someone is listening and they might 100% relate to what you're saying, in fact, they could relate to both sides. They could think, I have those autistic characteristics, and I also have some of those ADHD characteristics. How could those shared characteristics show up, manifest in someone?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, that, because it's kind of what fits where, which can be very confusing. So for somebody, say, who has ADHD, then they might find it very difficult to, say, plan their day or keep the timekeeping. But also, if they have autism, then they might be desperate to have structure and desperate for predictability and want that very much, but then find it really hard to kind of keep that. And then on the kind of social side of things, and again, there can be the real longing in ADHD for connection, but then also with autism, more kind of social withdrawal, which is what I want to be on my own here. I find it difficult. The other big thing as well, I suppose, that can cross over is the sensory stuff. So, like, for people with ADHD, they can get very overwhelmed with certain senses, i.e. kind of certain noises or certain things that are going to touch their skins can really set them off. And also massively so with people with autism, they can really struggle with kind of sensory stuff as well. And with ADHD, it's how the person kind of regulates their emotions. So they can struggle with emotion regulation. But again, with autism, you've got stimming. So, stimming can be where the person's going to be maybe flapping their hands, and that's how they're trying to regulate their emotions. So absolutely, there can be massive crossover between the two, yeah.
Because the stimming's fascinating. I always have this thumb stone in my hand. It's a little thing that I just rub my thumb through. And if I genuinely panic if I lose this. If I lost this today, it would create a lot of anxiety. And I would be less able to focus on what you're saying. It's a tool I use to manage my hyperactivity. I'm always curious to hear about the contradictions, because the more I learn about AuDHD, it seems that there are quite a lot of glaring contradictions. So on the one hand, like you said, there could be sensory sensitivities, but also a desire for stimulation. Like the autistic side is very sensitive to light, sound, potentially touch, but the ADHD might be craving stimulation. On the other hand, the ADHD might make you very impulsive and make you go towards fun and excitement. You might say yes to that social gathering because that sounds really fun. But then the autism might dread the lack of structure, or might need to meticulously plan the details of how you're going to get there. And I wonder if, from your point of view, like, what do you think are some opposing traits of the two conditions, and how might that create an internal battle within someone who's dealing with them.
Yeah, it's fascinating now because I want to just come back to ADHD for a sec, because with ADHD is in extremes.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like here or here.
Yeah.
And staying in the middle ground is hard. And so if you've got that in the mix anyway, and then you kind of chuck in some traits with autism. So, what you can see that is the impulsivity of ADHD, where the person is maybe acting impulsively, but actually the opposing side of that is predictability. So for one of the symptoms of autism is struggling with change and managing change. So you can have those kind of two extremes, which is the impulsivity, but at the same time, I don't want change. And of course, somebody who's impulsive is changing very quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
So that can be actually very stressful. And then another one that can be massively opposing is on the social side. So somebody with ADHD might be kind of craving that social stimulation, not really wanting to kind of jump into that energy. But then on the opposing side of autism is misreading the cues, not being able to read the room, or hating small talk. And I'm thinking, oh God, I'm going to find that really, really challenging. And then another thing you can see that's opposing as well is when it comes to the emotional regulation. So for somebody with ADHD, they might kind of get prone to outbursts, or get very overwhelmed. But also for somebody who has autism, they might get very confused by their feelings. They're thinking, what is this, or what's happening? So it can be. And this is why in this particular, the mix between autism and ADHD, for the person who has both of those going on, it can cause real stress and tension for them, because they're kind of almost in a state where they're being pulled in multiple different directions, but then trying to maintain stability, which can be really hard, of course.
Can it be confusing for somebody who has both of these conditions, who might experience such fluctuations in their mood, their energy, their desire to be social? For example, you could get very excited about an invitation to a work party, because that's fun, that you're going to be social. In that moment, the dopamine's high and you're really energetic to go. And then you go and you walk in and you're in a heightened mood, you're having a great time. But then an hour later, your social battery just disappears, and your personality completely changes. From how confusing is that for someone who doesn't understand that they might be living with AuDHD? How confusing can that almost drastic mood shift be internally?
It can be very difficult, because they're kind of like they're the silent struggles that people have. And that's the stuff that leads to masking, Alex. So like when the person is trying, and you see this especially with autism, like some of the patients I've treated, like how they literally learn how to behave in social situations. And they might learn from a TV show or a character in a TV show. Some of my patients, I hear them changing their accents. I'm like,
yes, I've come out of the cinema and I adopt the lead role.
Yeah.
I'm less so now, but totally aware of it in the past.
Yeah. And that's kind of a classic kind of autism trait, which is, again, because there's a sense of, well, I don't know how to really be in social situations, so I'll create this person, or I'll adapt because I've seen that worked in another situation, or but again, it's all masking. And the thing with masking, it's exhausting.
Yes.
It's exhausting when you mask. So being able to kind of be energized and present in a social situation, but you're constantly trying to stay one step. And also, if the mask drops or something comes at left field, then you're thrown. So if you don't have the resources to be able to manage that, then that can cause real anxiety, which is, well, I don't know what to do now. And that's where the person can get very overwhelmed. Or one of the things with autism as well is selective mutism. So where the person kind of literally goes mute, because that's their way of feeling safe in a situation where they don't know how to respond, or their nervous system is so anxious that they can't manage the anxiety any other way. So it can be very, very again, the stories I hear, like it it can be very difficult to navigate that. Really difficult. And also, like when that happens, sadly, it can compound the real sense of what's wrong with me and why can't I do this? And especially if you're looking around the room and everybody else seems to be absolutely fine at this particular social event and you're not, or you say something and in terms of maybe missing a social cue and you get you get a negative response, then again, that can trigger great shame in terms of, well, what do I do with that? So it can be very, very difficult, yeah. I mean, and certainly the work I do with my patients, we do huge amounts of work around being able to navigate all of that. Because you want especially because I see loads of teenagers, like I would say to them, I want you to be out there having an amazing like teenage life, going to parties and hanging out with people, not isolated.
So interesting about the selective mute.
Yes.
If I'm speaking to someone, I'm very comfortable. I'm very confident. But if I'm at a dinner party or I'm at an event where there's multiple people all having a conversation, I can go non-verbal.
Yeah.
It's almost because I don't know who to zone in on and who to replicate their body language, their persona. So there's too many incoming signals for me to mirror. So I end up completely just shutting down and going non-verbal. Yeah. So to hear you say that, I mean, masking is something I've always been super fascinated by, and also the emotional energy that it takes, and also like the disconnect, therefore, between the version that you're putting on and the understanding to who you really are underneath. Yeah. And I mean, is it possible for somebody to mask so hard that they actually get missed for both diagnoses? Definitely, yeah, definitely. I think I was on my ADHD. It's kind of like when you do the history and you kind of I feel with ADHD, you kind of it's a bit more. It can be very disruptive in the person's life, and if you're seeing that pattern, and also you are kind of listening for it, then I feel with ADHD you can kind of it almost screams at you, but with autism. It's subtle. It can be very, very subtle, where if the person has been masking so well for so long, then it can be very hard to pick up, particularly if they've spent years being able to mask so well that it's almost become a part of their functioning. But so where you see with autism, where it is certainly just in the work that I've done, is if there's a big area of kind of stress or change, and then they're really struggling to navigate that change, and the change is causing a lot of distress, then that might be your kind of thing, well, what is that? Yeah, because with ADHD, it's not the person with ADHD can't manage change, but they don't necessarily get so kind of stuck in being able to navigate that. Whereas with autism, it can be really, really hard to be able to deal with those transitional changes in life. Yeah. Have you seen an increase in the number of patients coming to you with AuDHD? Oh, yeah, definitely over the years, Alex. Yeah, because I was just thinking about this way back when, like, I wasn't even qualified back in Ireland. I worked there was a specialist clinic for, at the time, it was called Asperger's syndrome. We don't call it that anymore. I remember when I was working in that clinic, we had, all the young people that were in the clinic with us had Asperger's syndrome. But over the years, certainly in the last 10 years, I'd say, that we're seeing that more kind of mixed presentation, which is ADHD and autism. And the research is getting there, but it's still very it's still in its infancy really around where we're at with this. But some research suggests that 80% of patients who have autism have ADHD. A quick word from our sponsors to address a big ADHD issue, the notebook fallacy. We all convince ourselves that buying that one magic notebook will solve all of our problems, but it never does. Nor does the second one, or the third, or the 10th. Well, Tiimo app is more useful than having all the notebooks in the world. And what use are notebooks if you keep losing your pen anyway? Tiimo app has hugely helped me organize my chaotic life by offering the most user-friendly interface an organizational app has to offer. The difference is, it's designed by neurodiverse brains for neurodiverse brains. And you can tell. It's built to adapt to your neurodiverse way of thinking and be flexible to your way of planning. And now it's even more simple with the AI planning assistant. Tiimo now offers an incredible new voice transcribing service, making it even easier to use. A simple voice prompt when you have to plan something or something pops into your mind, and the new AI planning assistant hears it and transcribes it instantly into an easily digestible list of instructions for you to remember. Tiimo is here to help you simplify planning, build focus, and make life happen. No more decision paralysis. The new AI planning assistant makes it so quick and easy to insert information, you can do it before you've forgotten or been distracted. Give it a go and use the link in my bio for 30% off. Just a note though, this code is only applicable on the web browser, not on the smartphone. Then, when Tiimo solves all of your problems, go ahead and use your notebooks for something useful, like propping up a wobbly table leg or mopping up a spilt coffee. Back to the episode. The next question's really, really interesting, Mark. And what part of the brain is responsible for the characteristics of autism? And what part of the brain is responsible for the characteristics of ADHD?
Believe it or not, they overlap. Yeah. So you've got two main parts, which is your prefrontal cortex, which is this bit here. So that's the bit way back when they were doing crazy things, they'd lobotomize people and think, oh, let's take a piece of the brain away here. So they would do it here. And then the other bit is your cerebellum, which is Latin for little brain. So this is the part of your brain back here, back of your head. And so with the prefrontal cortex with ADHD, so we talk about this at length where in terms of understanding it from research that in the brain of a person with ADHD develops at the same rate as everybody else. However, the prefrontal cortex, it develops slower. So we're thinking about like a 3-year delay in terms of it being in slower in development. So what that means with the person with ADHD is that the ability to be able to organize and do kind of, again, come back to executive functioning, planning, all that kind of stuff is a bit more problematic. So that's an ADHD. Now in autism, it's slightly different. So that part, again, the prefrontal cortex to do with kind of social cognition, kind of understanding and managing social situations, then that becomes a bit more problematic with the prefrontal cortex. Now, coming back to the cerebellum, again, with ADHD, believe it or not, that's the bit that can be to do with the motor functioning. So like, ADHD, you can forget things and drop things, and it, can be something be a bit clumsy. And timing. So we think that's to do with the time blindness. Is that part of the brain kind of deals with that? So that's what ADHD. And with autism, again, it's to do with more kind of executive functioning and also the challenges with social situations. Because remember, with autism, the two main symptoms of autism are the social difficulties and then the repetitive behaviors and the repetitive interests. So they're the two kind of main things. So from what we know, and it's not just that, they're kind of the two main parts of the brain. There's other parts as well, but they're kind of the key players here when it comes to the autism and ADHD.
So it's good to know that there's a part of my brain that is responsible for when I think I'm going to be somewhere in 5 minutes.
Yes, it's your cerebellum. It's like playing my cerebellum. That's why I'm always late.
And of course, it's only semi-recently that the medical community has almost caught up and recognized that someone can have ADHD and autism. Yeah. Why do you think it took so long for them to make that connection?
Alex, I'm going to tell you exactly why it took so long. There's a very black and white answer to that. So, and by the way, when I answer this question, I'm not dissing my profession by any means, but it's not an exact science. We're learning all the time. The brain's a very complicated organ to understand. So when it comes to understanding different disorders, the American Psychiatric Association have the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, or DSM. So DSM gets updated every couple of years. The last one came out in 2013, DSM-5. But with DSM-4, that was in 1994. Back in 1994, there was no, you weren't allowed to diagnose autism and ADHD together. They had to be separate. So there was no kind of dual diagnosis allowed. So, and the reason for that is because they saw autism as like a developmental condition, and they saw ADHD as a behavioral problem. So if you had somebody who, say, there was a similar, what we talked about earlier, the similarity of symptoms, they'll always go for autism. It was always autism, never ADHD. So the dual diagnosis didn't happen. So that was back kind of 1994. And jump up then to 2013 when DSM-5 came out. So when DSM-5 came out, that's when things started to change. So you had then the introduction of autism spectrum disorder was that new diagnosis that went into DSM-5. And also they were permitting not the actual kind of dual diagnosis, but they said, yes, you can actually assess for both, and that both assessments can sit side by side. So that kind of changed everything really when they updated it. But that's like 12 years ago now, hey? We still haven't moved on yet for the official diagnosis of AuDHD. Yeah, it's not there yet.
So interesting. And obviously AuDHD is, so we're stitching two words together. We're stitching the name of two conditions together to create AuDHD. But do you think AuDHD in itself would ever be its own diagnosis?
I hope so. I was thinking about this, like, you know the word burnout? Like, that's still not an official diagnosis. We'll often say to patients, like, we think you have burnout, but that's been around since the 70s. Yeah. Like, that's been around for ages. And that's still not an official diagnosis. So I'm not being kind of negative here, but it might take a while. And the reason it takes a while is you're going to put something into the DSM, then you have to get consensus of the professions agreeing with this. It has to be research. They've got to do loads of stuff around saying that this is an official diagnosis. So I think until that starts to change, then you might see it, but those things can take a very long time to reach official diagnosis, yeah.
Do you think there's reluctance within the medical community in some areas of it? Do you think some doctors just don't agree that you can have both still, or are reluctant to diagnose it together, therefore people are still getting missed?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. The funny thing, like, I was talking to somebody about this the other night, because they were asking, what do you think about, like, energy therapies? And I said, well, I don't know enough about those. But one of the things I think, when you do this job is you kind of tend to stay in your lane, which isn't ideal sometimes because, you have a job to do and you know what you need to do. But because you stay in your lane, then, like, even certainly for some doctors, even if they think, oh, this could be, say, autism as well as ADHD, unless it's like glaringly obvious that this is a problem for this patient, or this patient presents with this, then you might not go into that conversation with the patient. And that's where I suppose we come in, where certainly you can start to bring a conversation to try and uncover it, but there can be a reluctance, to go into something if you think, well, this is not my area, or this, I shouldn't be looking at this. Yeah.
How common do you think it is for someone who has AuDHD to have this internal self-description of, because of these contradictions, of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Like, they might want to be around people, they might crave social encounters and social situations, but simultaneously the thought of that is so exhausting.
Yeah.
How often do you think that is that internal narrative, that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde self-talk? How often does that happen?
It's a lot. Because again, you can hear it, because when I'm talking to my patients about, like, they tell me this, like, they tell me that, well, I'm they're present, but they're not tuned in. And what I mean by that is that they're physically present, but they're like in their heads. They're constantly trying to stay a step ahead. They're constantly trying to not say something that is going to bring negative attention to them, or they're desperately trying to make eye contact, so they're looking interested. So it's all of that, and also, the other piece of that is that if they hear something and they want to deep dive into that, then it's like, well, I can't do that. Like I can't show an obsessive side to myself. So they're holding back. They're not being their authentic selves, which again is like, that's really sad, because that just creates stress and anxiety in those social situations. They're constantly trying to adapt out of trying to fit in. But actually, that comes at a very high price in terms of the anxiety that causes. Yeah.
That price, is that the inability or the struggle to find your true sense of self? Because if you've got these two opposing characteristics, and sometimes they're literally pulling you in different directions, you want different things.
Yeah.
How hard is it, if you have that internal tug of war, to find your true self?
It's very tough. It's very tough, because in order to find your true self, then you have to be allowed to be comfortable, and to allow yourself to say that, well, this is what I like, and this is the stuff that we often use that expression, feeds my soul. So this is the stuff that really excites me and gets fire in my belly. But if you're constantly like tuning out of that, then like you're never really living an authentic life, about life full of passion and stuff that you really care about, and that energizes you and that makes you feel connected. It's constantly trying to please other people, or give other people what you think is going to give you acceptance from that person. So there's a huge disconnect in that. And in that disconnection, then that person can be living a life where, it's making everybody else happy because you're getting acceptance, but actually they're miserable.
But what happens if the thing that truly excites you, and just for example, the ADHD side of you is naturally drawn towards risky behavior sometimes, or that social event sometimes. But the thing that excites you, which is those things, is also the cause of a lot of anxiety within the autistic side of you.
Yeah.
What if the thing that excites you is also kind of your worst enemy?
Yeah. That can be a massive challenge. Yeah. That can be a massive challenge. So with that, that's about right, again, setting healthy boundaries and recognizing, okay, well, if it's risky behavior, then does the risky behavior have consequences? And is the consequences going to harm me or damage me or harm somebody else? But also with the autistic piece, that can also be, again, in working through that, which is, well, am I deep diving into something because it's giving me pleasure and I'm enjoying that? Or is that more, is that causing me distress or causing me anxiety? So it needs to be picked apart in terms of understand. And this was the other piece of it, is how does it make me feel? Because sometimes with ADHD, you get an excessive feeling, but with the autism piece, sometimes the feelings can be confusing.
I'm thinking about, if it's a bit of a classic example now, but if you go to a party, you go to a work social event, and you meet someone, and you get very excited, you impulsively overshare, and in that moment, the ADHD is having a great time. But then you get home, and you start meticulously replaying that conversation in your head, and that creates a lot of anxiety. I overshared, that person now hates me. Do you see additional mental health struggles that this internal contradiction could cause?
Definitely, yeah. So the research would tell us that if you have ADHD and autism, in terms of that exists sitting in your head, then you're more likely to experience anxiety and depression than just having one of those. So, and again, for that exact reason, which is, staying with the social event, if you're going to a social event and already before you go, you're nervous about small talk, you're nervous about reading the room or coming across as socially awkward, then you're already anxious before you go. You're already anticipating how this is going to go. So you're not fully relaxed. But then if you do go, and then like you said, you start to overshare, or you say something which kind of feels a bit socially awkward, then that's going to throw you. And then when you get home then with the overthinking piece, then that's going to, like, it's caused that spiral. And in that spiral, if the shame kicks off, and then you start to feel that you've ruined the evening, or that people are going to dislike you, the RSD kicks in, then absolutely, like, that stuff can, and again, especially with ADHD, that stuff in terms of it escalating very quickly when it comes to emotional dysregulation can really be upsetting and actually very dangerous as well for somebody to be in that space. Yeah.
With RSD, do you think it's a different battleground with someone who has AuDHD as opposed to someone who might just have ADHD or autism? Yeah,
definitely. So with the RSD, especially with ADHD, because that's so obviously the sensitivity is so present. So there's a sensitivity to the possibility I'm going to be rejected, but also picking up on those very small cues. That's just what's going on. Whereas with the, and interestingly enough, I don't have to go into too much detail with this, but anyway, I think it's important. With the RSD, because that's such a strong feature of ADHD, then somebody with ADHD can read the room very well. Whereas with, if you've got the autistic piece, it might be very hard to read the room and actually pick up on what's going on. So the person doesn't realize, oh, I've crossed a line here, until they get the response. And that can be very confusing because they haven't anticipated that, or they're not reading the room in the same way as maybe the person who just has ADHD would be reading the room.
And with these additional mental health struggles, is there a higher risk that someone with AuDHD could fall into addictions?
Yeah, well, we know with ADHD that the rate of addiction in terms of now when we say addiction, we're talking about not just the substances but the behaviours, so gambling and not just drugs and alcohol. They're 2 to 3 times more likely to have a problem with addiction, and definitely with ADHD. With autism, I think probably not so much. Again, there can be some kind of addictive behaviors that can take place. But again, especially with ADHD, because you've got the instant gratification, the chasing dopamine, the risk-taking behavior, the excitement, then that can actually lead to the addictive behaviors becoming more of a problem. Whereas with autism, yeah, possibly, but you don't have the same, I suppose, the same chase that you'd have in the ADHD brain.
With AuDHD, I suppose we know the addiction risks with ADHD, but if someone has AuDHD, and on a day where the ADHD is prominent and they drink or they relapse or they do whatever their addiction is, the following day, could the autism and that meticulous detail and focusing on it create a health anxiety and focus on the consequences of that binge, and therefore create this almost hyper focus towards what have I done to my body? I'm now really anxious about my health.
Yeah, totally. I often hear that, which is it's funny because the targeted the very kind of rigid thinking, it's the hangover headache is a brain tumor. Or have I poisoned my body? Am I going to die? One of the very common ones I hear is, am I going to have a psychotic episode? So yeah, absolutely. you can spiral into that place where the thinking becomes completely irrational. But what the person is doing there is they're in that kind of very rigid thought around all the consequential thinking, and they're panicking as well. So yeah, that absolutely can happen. Yeah, and lots of reassurance. You're fine. Yeah.
Just finally, Mark, I'm excited to do the ADHD agony aunt section.
Yes.
It's called the washing machine of woes because I You're familiar with the
I am
very familiar with the washing machine.
I know
of
this
woes.
washing machine well, yeah.
For anyone who isn't, it's called the washing machine of woes because I always forget my washing in the machine.
Yes.
Very classic. But I'm getting better now that I'm using the Tiimo app, which is the sponsor of the show.
Thank you, Timon.
But this,
And I must say, your clothes look and smell very clean today.
Thank you very much.
So it's working.
Yeah. This week, Mark, someone has written in and asked, I've been diagnosed with ADHD and I think I might have autism too, but my friends think I want another label. How can I get them to understand that I'm struggling and it's not another label I want? I just want to understand myself.
Listening to that, I think, is it twice or three times the word label is in the question. And I think that's probably part of the problem here, which is like, labels can be useful in terms of giving you maybe some context, but they're not hugely helpful in terms of explaining your lived experience. So listening to this question, I think what the person is struggling with is getting their friends to understand them or getting their friends to be able to realize the struggle. And I think that's the real problem here, actually, is the friends might be thinking, well, this is why do you want that? And for this particular person, well, they might need that or feel that they need that in order to be understood. So the label essentially will give them the way to explain to their friends, well, look, this is why I'm struggling. But I think that's the actual issue here. So what I would suggest is, helping your friends understand what it is that maybe you're struggling with, and maybe also why it's important that your friends understand that struggle. Because if this particular person is feeling, well, they just don't understand me, or they don't get me, or they just think, well, you're looking for attention, whatever it is, then that can feel alienating, but also can feel like they're being judged. And the label's almost like, you see, this is why it's going on. So I think that's more of an issue with the friendship there, and also just the being able to speak to their friends about the experience of why you're feeling that this is so important, that they understand this part of your life. And again, I think that's a very, just to normalize that, I think that's a very common challenge that people who may have ADHD and autism, which is, it can be very difficult for them to understand themselves and to figure, like we talked about in this episode about it can be very confusing and very stressful. So if you're struggling with that, then obviously by extension, that can be really hard then for feeling that, well, my friends understand me, or they're maybe they're confused. So I think if they're good friends, you can have an open conversation with them, and they're on your side, they're on your team, then that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah.
Truly fascinating. Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.
Yeah, on behalf of everyone who's ever described themselves as a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and is grappling for answers and understanding, thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me again.